What's up? It's Friday. It's time for another expert roundup. Today, we're talking real estate with my man Michael. We'll be back in a few seconds. Michael, my man, what's going on?
Hey, just hanging loose in sunny Florida.
Sunny Florida. What part of Florida are you in?
We are in the Panhandle, Pensacola, right
Nice.
near the Alabama border, near Mobile.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot going on along the Gulf Coast here.
Now, tell everybody in the audience who you are and what you do for a living.
Well, my name is Michael Caro. I'm a CCIM. We specialize in restaurant realty. We've got clients, both national, local clients that we do property searches for, evaluations for. We work with them on improving their financials to the point where if they want to sell it, they might want to work on it for 1 to 2 years to prepare for a big sale. I do brokerage primarily. I'm looking for real estate opportunities to buy, lease, or sell for clients. And we tend to focus on the restaurant space. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. In addition, of course, I own several restaurant properties. And then I'm also an investor in restaurant businesses. We've got over 100 properties, 100 restaurant locations, 85 of them being fast food, 11 being pizza, and then a smattering of maybe 5 or 6 others that are just one-offs. So I've got my hand into a lot of pies, but something that I've really enjoy and have a passion for.
So are you all over the country with some of your real estate you have now and people you're helping, or do you focus in certain regions mainly?
It really depends. If primarily it's focused on the South. If I get a national client that needs real estate in a lot of other states going further west or further north, I'm part of the SVN network. So I have brokers and agents all across the country that I can help other clients grow into other marketplaces. So, but what I would typically do is interview those brokers in other areas, because a restaurant broker is very, very different skill set than a generic broker who might transact very few restaurants on an annual basis, because a restaurant lease or a restaurant building is so different infrastructure wise than others. We just got to be mindful of that difference. And I really want to identify experts in a field. And sometimes they may fall outside of the SVN family, but most of the time we've got great brokers in all communities.
So talking about restaurants, and you talked about the specificity of their needs. I'm seeing a lot of empty storefronts in the Midwest around. I've been down south of Florida. I've been 10 states in the last 3 months, and I noticed the empty storefronts. I noticed where restaurants used to be, and I've talked to some people who are taking advantage of some of these great opportunities. That it's a good location that hasn't been available, and the restaurant didn't survive the pandemic, and it went away. If you're a restaurant operator that's looking into new spaces and there's a space available, and it seems easy, right? It was a restaurant before. It was a barbecue restaurant. I'm a barbecue restaurant. What are some of the pitfalls they might fall into? They need to make sure that, that equipment's there or that the build out's right. What are some things you would advise they look at before they sign a dotted line and get too excited?
Well, the first thing is you really need to understand the municipality and the rules surrounding certain things. In my area, if a restaurant goes out of business and you reopen within 1 year, in most cases, any issues with the building is grandfathered if you reopen within a year. But I'm going to tell you, 1 year and 1 day, the municipality can say, nope, sorry, you have to bring that up to the current standards. And that's where the wheels can fall off a transaction. So you really need to be mindful of how long was it closed and what's the local municipality's criteria for that type of closure. That's kind of rare, but it does happen and it can bite you. Also, if you want to modify something as simple as a restroom, be careful of modifying restrooms, because that, again, every area is different. So I can't, but you start modifying a restroom, it may open up a can of worms of losing a grandfathering status, because invariably a restroom that was built 5 years ago as ADA compliant is no longer in compliance today because of the new rules. Sometimes it needs to be 4 inches larger or this or that. And so it's something that you just got to be mindful of. Have a good architect or a good general contractor that understands the regulations within that space to help guide you through. Or, of course, if you have a restaurant broker that does this every day, they may also know the rules, but always rely on the municipality standards.
Yeah, and that's huge because the building I'm in now, when I bought it, that was one of the pieces of advice I was given by the contractors and by people like, hey, just gonna go ahead and warn you. And even the people from the inspection, like if you alter this bathroom, it's been like this for 15 years. It was at the compliance level 15 years ago.
Right.
I don't know that it isn't now, but if it gets changed how you might want to do it, you might have a can of worms. And so that's always big. And I had an issue one time with a friend of mine's restaurant that for whatever bizarre reason, the sign couldn't be changed. And there was a whole headache with that where he assumed he rented the space. The sign was up that he could just pop his thing. And they're like, no, you altered the sign. Their municipality had different rules. And
typically the sign frame, as long as you stay within the confines of the sign frame, typically in most cases, because, you go back and you look at this giant, beautiful sign, you're like, I want to see my company in that sign. Well, if you use the existing frame, many municipalities will let you simply change out the face and put in your face. But you alter that frame at all, and let's say the new sign standard are half and lower, because a lot of times these local governments, they really want you to be behind 10 trees and can't see your sign, which of course I can't stand doing business in those. Yeah, they're beautiful, but when you can't see the restaurants, when you can't see the retailers, it's just difficult to get the marketing out. And of course you're going to spend money on marketing, but it's you're going to amplify your marketing campaigns to get your voice out in those areas that have these heavy duty landscaping ordinances as well.
Yeah. And speaking of landscaping, it leads into my next question. I had a guy recently in an area of town I'm familiar with that was going to put a Rally's in, and he had what he thought was a great piece of property and everything was going to fit. And then I looked at it and I'm like, man, that's a small piece of land for what you want to do. It's like, our footprint. And I'm like, well, your footprint, but if you calculated the number of handicap spots you got to have, the number of trees you got to have, the number of bushes, mulch beds, and sure enough, the Rally's isn't there now. A car wash is, because what he needed from a restaurant standpoint wouldn't have worked on that lot. And he went through a lot of process. He had a deposit on the property. He had all this stuff. And is there any way you can avoid that? Does that come from hiring the right professional that's, acclimated to that industry and to that region?
Well, I'm going to nuance your statement for a second. So you've got a Rally's that needed a small footprint. The car wash needs 3 times the footprint. So what it sounds like is the car wash bought the adjacent property around it, because you can't fit a car wash on the same size as a Rally's. So
what it was the way the property, it's stair steps. Yeah. The Rally's was going to be down here. The car wash actually lifted it up and did it. But yeah, you're right.
Which is really expensive, right? So, it's again, that's where a civil engineer comes into play. You don't even need an architect. You really just need to hire a civil engineer. He'll do the site plan with the proper easements, setbacks, ingress, egress. And that's usually the first line of defense before you ever hire an architect and even design a building. A good civil engineer will answer all those questions right away. And they can usually, if provided that they have the time, they can knock that out really almost in a couple of days and give you something that, will let you at least know whether or not you could take the next step.
Okay.
I'll walk you through a really fun example. There was a building here in Pensacola that was a great location. And I called up the broker. It had been on the market for years. And I called the broker up, and he knows I do a lot of restaurants. And he says, Mike, are you going to try to do a restaurant here? I said, yeah. He goes, sorry, can't be a restaurant. And I said, well, why? He goes, we don't have enough parking. Doesn't meet the parking requirement. I was like, okay. So I still submitted an offer for it that got accepted from the seller, knowing that they believe that we weren't going to get it done. I'm going to tell you, a 5-minute phone call with the city. And I said, hey, listen, tell me about this property. Yeah, it can't be a restaurant. I said, why? Because it doesn't meet the parking code. And I said, well, are you guys counting the second floor? And they're like, well, yeah, that's part of the square footage. I said, what if we didn't use the second floor? He says, yeah, no problem. 5 minutes. That thing could have been sold
Wow.
10 times in the past 2 years. One
Wow.
5-minute phone call thinking outside the box got the deal done.
Wow. So they calculate the square footage of the building because they're assuming the people that are going to be in the property need cars.
Right.
That's genius.
Well,
That's where it comes for hiring experts.
That's right. That's exactly right. And,
Right.
it's not that the other folks weren't experts, but they just weren't thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
We didn't need the second floor. This happened to be a Nukes eatery.
Yeah.
Nukes didn't need the second floor. And by the way, the city wasn't even going to require us to tear out the second floor. They were going to require it not to be used. So putting up a barrier, it could have been used for an office.
A storage or
But
something.
ultimately, Nukes Eatery decided, you know what? We're going to like the design better by just knocking out the second floor. And they rebuilt it and made a really beautiful Nukes Eatery here in Pensacola.
It's awesome. I've never heard of Nukes. What is Nukes Eatery?
You've heard of Jason's Deli?
Yeah.
It's really the same type of concept. In fact, McAllister's Deli was started by Newcomb, is the family name. When the family sold McAllister's probably to private equity, once their non-compete expired, then they started Nukes, NEWK''S. And it's really a spinoff of McAllister's, and all the things that they wanted to change with McAllister's, they incorporated that into Nukes.
Okay. And that's excellent because I have my podcast I have next week, my other podcast, MPTV. I have a banker on named Lytle Thomas from the local bank I deal with. And him and I were talking about the value of having what he called kind of your small business board of directors, that you might not have a board of directors for your business, but you've got your attorney, you've got your real estate expert, you've got your CPA, you've got your tax accountant, you've got your banker. And the reason it came up was I said, dude, what really surprised me when the pandemic hit was I did a handful of webinars on the PPP, on the EIDL loans. I leveraged the relationships that I had of people like experts like yourself in the financial restaurant world. And we did webinars, we did content. I said, I get calls every week, people calling me, a marketing guy, about the PPP. And I'm like, dude, you need to talk to your accountant. Well, I don't have one. I do my stuff for TurboTax. I'm like, I was amazed to see the number of $1, $2, $3 million a year restaurants that don't have the connections like that. Right. And that's one thing I've always prided myself on, is having those connections and all the different elements that are going to help me with my business. And so what you just said there really hits home, that there might have been 100 people that looked at that property, that from the person that was selling it, not having the right agent in place that could have squashed that idea, or the people buying it, not having the person on their side that thought through that process to go, I'm going to ask some questions.
Well, I'll take it a step further just for fun. The Nukes franchisee had engaged another broker here in town, and after a year of not finding sites, he decided to come to me. And one of the first sites I mentioned was this. He goes, Mike, we would love that site, can't buy it. And I said, well, why? And I said, well, how about you let me worry about the obstacles? You just tell me what you like. And we ended up doing that deal so fast. And this is something that they could have gotten open, a year or two earlier, when they started the search. So it wasn't until the frustration level was high that they then turned to me. And we just, listen, maybe I got lucky, maybe I've got experience, but either way, we got the deal done.
Well, in my opinion, luck comes from doing this stuff long enough and going down those roads. I don't think luck exists. I think it's a matter of knowing your shit and being in the right place.
When preparation meets opportunity, that's luck.
Exactly. What are some things you're seeing on the real estate forefront? I mean, is anything out there that's got you excited with regards to buying real estate, investing in real estate? Because like I've got a building in front of my building that's for sale. Just went up. It's in foreclosure. It's $3.2 million. It's like 30,000 square feet of office space. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, man, where we're at in Northern Kentucky, there's not many people coming in looking for that much office space, but I'm thinking I got to figure out a way to buy it for something else. What is exciting you in the real estate business?
Creativity wins the day. And it's funny that you say you're looking at this 30,000 square foot office building, because after the pandemic, July of last year, I bought, for part of my portfolio, a 40,000 square foot office building. When everybody's running from office, I was like, interesting. And by the way, I paid $40 a square foot.
Okay.
And the building was losing $100,000 a year and
Wow.
the guy
That's not a
paid a
good
million.
ROI.
Right. The guy paid $1 million more 10 years prior. So I go in there but I'm also seeing, hey, listen, the area is a little bit rough, but I'm seeing everything going towards that building. I'm seeing it all get renovated. Okay. And we are in a very strong community here. So we're not seeing the foreclosures that you may be having in your area. So, Florida is doing extremely well. Pensacola is doing extremely well, but it still requires a lot of creativity. And so, I ended up closing on that in July and going in, and it was an old, tired 1960s building that just hadn't been loved on in a long time. But one space at a time, I'm rehabbing, and guess what? I'm filling it up. I'm like, interesting, rehabbing. And so now I got one more office to lease up, and then I'll be 100% full. Wow. With the understanding, and this is why he sold it, one of the reasons. In August of this year, the largest tenant that occupies 50% of the building is leaving.
Okay.
So all I'm doing is I'm building up to the point where when they leave, I won't hemorrhage cash. Yep. And but when they leave in August, I'll be 100% full, and then I'll come back in backfill. And by the way, I'm leasing up all the bad space by comparison, because the tenant that occupies half the building has all the good space. So when that comes online, and by the way, it takes me 3 years typically to turn a building like that into a cash cow. And I'm actually ahead of schedule on this property. So don't count out those office buildings. And let me offer one bit of advice. And I know we're talking about restaurants, but I don't care what the asset class is. If you're more creative than the next guy, you're going to win the day. And I'm going to tell you where I've done what I've done with 3 of the larger suites.
Okay.
I took one suite and turned it into executive office space. So I'm leasing one office at a time. It's got 10 offices in there, and they're leasing from $500 to $700 a month. Now, all of the leases in this place were terrible. We're talking $6 a square foot, leases, which are just atrocious. And the market in this area is probably 12. But you have to give a tenant something more for them to move in. And I don't mean money-wise. I mean, we're delivering a higher quality experience. When they move in, they're going into a great suite, not something dated from the 60s. So in order for me I have to invest in each space, but each space I lease up, and I'm getting double the rent, but they're also getting double the quality. And so I've taken this this one suite, turned it into an executive office space.
Now, did you put a nice reception area, a little shared area out there, a common area?
Yes, but I don't hire a receptionist. Believe it or not, what I do is I lease up a receptionist area. So I charge another tenant who wants their own receptionist. I still charge that as a rental item. And they have to understand, hey, listen, as long as that person understands they're going to have to answer questions, if they're coming to see somebody. And this is my 4th location where I've done executive offices, and every one of them is working the same way, and they're going phenomenal.
Well, I can see that space working, because I was a sole proprietor for a long time. Like, I've got 9,000 square feet here now, and we've got a shared workspace with a handful of executive offices that we've rented out. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the rest of it's my team. But I can see that, because there's a lot of people I know that are attorneys and accountants, especially attorneys that leave a firm at 60 years old and still want to practice, but they can't go to Panera, but they'd like that 10 by 12, executive office.
Exactly. And that's kind of what we've got. In fact, the building that I'm in right now, we bought this 4 years ago. I converted this into 25 executive offices, and I'm 100% leased out.
Wow.
So I really like that model, but it's also good to take when you have too much square footage to get really creative. So in that particular building, I also created what we're calling service suites, where, you really don't fit into an executive office because you're not a professional in that, business type person, but you may be a hairstylist. You might be a nurse practitioner, somebody who sees clients on a different level. And I'll be darned, we've got 10 in there. We've got 1 availability. Wow. And so just get creative with the spaces, really do your job and take care of your current tenants, respect them, love them, but give them a higher quality product before you ask for a jump in rent or to charge them a triple net and things like that. So that's what I have done
Yep.
over and over and over again.
No, I love it. Yeah, and the building next to us, it's in foreclosure because the guy. It was kind of weird. The guy died, and it was a law firm, like 70 attorneys. He died. I don't know how the business wasn't in a good place, but it went away a few years ago, and then I guess his spouse got it, and it went through the roundup. But I'm looking at it like, hey, this might be a, like you're talking about, or I've actually have talked to a couple of guys about making it into apartments because the way the building's laid out, it's really open that it could be a cool thing. But like you said, you got to be creative. You got to look at it. You know, that's how I did this. I bought this 9,000 square foot office. At the time, I only needed 2,500 for my business. And that was my vision was, okay, how can I leverage 2,500 of this to bring revenue in to offset my cost of needing this bigger space and have an investment and go from there.
Right. Hey, that's what real estate is. You know, you got to be more creative than the next person. So,
and that's one thing too. I've talked to restaurant owners about that. It seems like a lot of restaurant owners are always looking just to lease spaces. And I talked to one recently that he was looking at a piece of property and it had 3 storefronts and it was for sale. And he's like, well, I don't really want to buy a building. I'm like, well, why not? If you buy it and structure it correctly, you can have those 2 people paying your rent, paying your mortgage. It just, I think a lot of them are, well, what if this doesn't work? Well, maybe you need to work on a different restaurant model that you think will work.
Well, the good thing is, and I'm going to tell you, this is the saving grace. If you open a restaurant, but you own the building like you're describing and it doesn't work, your ability to get out safely is much, much higher than if you go in and lease from somebody else and you might be on the hook. And depending on the state, because some states are terrible for what I'm about to say. So there's a term in a lease called acceleration. And acceleration is if you sign a 5-year lease, and I'll just use easy math for, let's say, $3,000 a month, $36,000 a year. Let me go easier math. Let's just say $50,000 a year. So it's a round number.
Okay.
After the first year, you go belly up. Well, you still owe 4 years of rent. Okay. Well, if you're in a state like Florida, Florida is really good for a tenant in the fact that, and I think it's fair for a tenant and for a landlord, but they're fair in the sense that the landlord has the obligation to help offset or mitigate your rental exposure. So if I'm a landlord and I release that space up 3 months later to another tenant of equal quality for $5,000 or for $50,000 a year, then guess what? Your obligation to me is only $15,000.
Nice.
Let me tell you where it goes really bad. A state like Alabama does not have a right to mitigate. They have acceleration. I don't mean to get into the law. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not giving any legal advice, but I've had this experience with one of my clients and it blew me away. So what they did was same scenario. After 1 year, they go out of business. The landlord, let's just say, leases it up 4 months later. In Florida, they owe $15,000, right? State of Alabama says, no. You owe the landlord. We've accelerated your total lease. You owe the landlord $50,000 a year times 4 years or $200,000. Even though the landlord wasn't out $200,000, they were only out $15,000. You have to know your laws as it relates to acceleration.
So the acceleration is that they've got to pay that payment.
That's right. That's rough. So and every state's different. So be careful.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it's an instance of if my restaurant does go out, well, hey, you got a real estate. You got a piece of real estate you own, lease it to somebody else and be a landlord. And that's kind of what I looked at this building. Like one of my visions, we've got 9,000 square feet here. And I think my company's now taking up 6,000 of the 9. And, I look at it, we're growing leaps and bounds. So I'm like, well, maybe I need to buy another building and this will be something different in 2 years. Who knows?
Right.
But I love real estate. I think
using your example from before, you get this 30,000 across the street. If this building that you're in is, I'll just say, better than the other one, well, guess what? Move your team into the other one, get that occupied, and continue to backfill this better space. But anyways,
that one's gorgeous.
That's the advantage that you have of being an end user as well. You also, as an end user, get better rates from the bank, and then there's also a program called SBA 504. And what that means is if you buy a building and you occupy 50% or more of that building, you qualify for this SBA 504 loan. And the 504 loan, what's that?
That's what I have on this building.
Right, and it's a fantastic loan. Typically it's a 20-year term and a 20-year amortization, whereas most commercial loans are a 20-year term, 20-year amortization and a 5-year term. And what that means is, just like your house, most people get a 30-year mortgage, and then every month for 30 years, if you pay your mortgage every month, at the end of 30 years you owe nothing. Commercial loans are different. They want you to amortize it over 20 years, so that way your payment's lower. But every 5 years, you got to go hat in hand and say, please, bank, please renew my loan. And so that's also a problem. So in the bank and the SBA loan, it's a 20-year term and a 20-year AM, and that's really good if you plan on holding it a long time. If you're planning on flipping it, it's a terrible loan because the exit costs are extensive.
Yeah, and that's what when I bought this building, that was one of the things they asked me, that exactly. Hey, here's the product we want to put you in. The guy that I had doing my loan, and that's what he helps find is money for property. And I told him what I was doing. I was like, okay, you would fit perfect in this SBA program. That's what we did. So, man, right. I appreciate you spending Friday afternoon with me. I appreciate the example. TheRestaurantRealty.com, is that right?
That's right. And just give me a call or email me anytime you need a question about something.
Cool. I appreciate the time. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the sunny Florida down there. And I'm going to enjoy the sun we're finally getting in Kentucky up here.
Beautiful.
See you, Michael.